Time can go by so fast in the NBA world. One day you're watching a 19-year-old rookie have a Rookie of the Year campaign, and the next he's 36 years old and one of the greatest players to ever play. Over the span of a long career, especially in today's NBA, you're probably not going to stay in the same jersey for the entire time. That can mean leaving in free agency or getting traded somewhere else, but it can also mean that these players are around for relocations, new team names, or a whole shift in franchise history. As almost all the players that I grew up watching in the 2000s and 2010s careers are coming to an end, it reminded me that there are still players left in the league that play for teams that look completely different now than they did some time ago. Some of these players are, in a way, the last active remnants of certain eras in franchise histories, and are also the last remaining players of a certain era of the NBA. My name is Caleb, and if you couldn't tell, we are very deep into the NBA offseason, but I did think the concept of having an NBA career last so long that they're the last remaining relic of a franchise that might be in a whole other place now is kind of interesting, especially when you take into consideration their last season in that place and what their NBA lives look like now. So today, I wanted to go through a handful of players who were the last ones to ever play for certain iterations of a franchise, their last seasons there, and what they're up to now. After KD was traded to the Rockets over the summer, a lot of people were bringing up how he's one of the last active players to ever play for the Seattle Supersonics after being drafted there 17 years ago. What's also cool about him joining the Rockets is that he reunited with the only other last active Seattle Supersonic, Jeff Green. The Sonics' history is a weird case because while they technically share franchise history with the Thunder since they moved from Seattle to OKC, everyone still kind of considers them a separate franchise anyway, so that's how we'll kind of look at it. Russell Westbrook was also briefly a Sonic too, as he was drafted by them, and there are promo photos of him in his Sonics jersey, but he never actually played for them as they moved to OKC shortly after he was drafted. But officially, KD and Jeff Green did suit up in Seattle for both of their rookie seasons during the 07-08 campaign. Obviously, by the time KD and Jeff Green got there, it had been a while since Seattle was any sort of a contender, shown by the fact that they had 2 lottery picks in 2008. But should the team had stayed in Seattle, they probably would have seen the same success that OKC would see just a few years later. Kevin Durant would go on to have a Rookie of the Year campaign and became one of only 3 teenagers in the history of the league to average 20 a game for a whole season. Jeff Green's draft rights were actually traded from Boston in the trade that got Ray Allen to the Celtics, but he'd also have a great rookie season in Seattle, going first team all rookie himself. But by that same time next year, they'd be playing for the Thunder as Seattle's ownership went through changes and moved the team to OKC. It's without explanation that KD would go on to have a Hall of Fame career, and Jeff Green would end up becoming one of the best role players of the last decade, with the two of them even becoming teammates again in Brooklyn in 2020, and now again for the 3rd time in their careers in Houston in 2025. As they are the last remaining Supersonics to ever play in the NBA, you always have to wonder what a Seattle resurgence could have looked like with those early years from KD, Jeff Green, Russell Westbrook, and even players like Serge Ibaka, who was also a part of that 2008 draft class alongside Russ. And speaking of the 2008 draft class, the Nets franchise would draft a player who would become their all-time leading scorer in the first round of that year's draft, and the last remaining NBA player who could say they played for the team when they were in New Jersey. Brook Lopez was still only 23 years old during the Nets last season in Jersey, and he was the bridge between 2 eras of Nets basketball. Vince Carter was one of my first favorite NBA players ever, and most of my first memories of the Nets were him playing alongside Brook Lopez in those jerseys that famously had the actual basketball nets on the side paneling. And the Nets as a whole didn't enjoy many successful seasons during those last few years in Jersey, but Lopez was beginning to play like an all-star. Especially in an era that was pretty weak for centers, Lopez stood out as genuinely one of the best at his position in the league. His last full season in Jersey in 2011, he averaged 20 points, 6 rebounds, and a block and a half a game before only playing 5 games in the Nets' final season in New Jersey in 2012. They'd make the move to Brooklyn for the 2013 season with a more minimalistic branding, a brand new state-of-the-art arena, and a team that was going to have their most successful season in years, with Lopez being one of the main catalysts. As time went on though, and the rosters would get worse, Brook was kind of the face of the franchise for the rest of the decade. He'd be traded to the Lakers in 2017 and have a career resurgence with the Bucks not too long after, becoming an outside threat in a league where everybody can shoot compared to when he came into the league in New Jersey back in 2008. Now with an NBA championship on his resume, he'd signed with the Clippers for the 25-26 season, a roster that's on pace to be the oldest in NBA history by average age. As a player who could possibly end his career on the Clippers, another 2008 draftee began his career on the Clippers and played for an iteration of a franchise that also doesn't exist anymore. The 2008 draft class actually had some pretty solid longevity in terms of role players, as Eric Gordon out of Indiana is also a 2008 draftee that is still hanging around in the NBA. Starting his career with the Clippers, he was involved in the trade that brought Chris Paul to LA in 2011 that kicked off the Lob City era. Chris Paul is also still active and is also one of the last New Orleans Hornets ever and arguably their best player in franchise history. But Gordon was sent to New Orleans and played for them relatively more recently, and when he got there, they were going through a transition period of their own, just in the complete opposite direction. Gordon's time with the Hornets was pretty solid for him individually, but from a team standpoint, it was time for a change, and in 2012, they drafted Anthony Davis first overall out of Kentucky to hopefully change their franchise's fortunes. Little did Gordon and AD know that they'd be two of the last 3 players left in the NBA to have ever worn a New Orleans Hornets jersey. For Gordon, he'd averaged 17 a game in that last season as a Hornet, while Anthony Davis would go on to have a first-team All-Rookie year. The 2014 season would see the Hornets franchise history change forever, as the then New Orleans Hornets would become the Pelicans, as owner Tom Benson wanted a team name that more represented the state of Louisiana. As time went on, Gordon and Davis would be mostly known as Pelicans rather than Hornets during both of their times in New Orleans, and would also go on to have more team success with other teams in their careers. Gordon continued to be one of the best three-point shooters in the league and even picked up a Sixth Man of the Year in Houston in 2017. And in 2025, he's now in Philadelphia for what I assume is one of his final stops in his career. AD would go on to win an NBA championship in 2020 with the Lakers and is more than likely going to end his career in the Hall of Fame. Now as a member of the Mavs and still only 32 years old, he will more than likely be the definitive last player to say that they played for the New Orleans Hornets when it's all said and done. The Pelicans franchise is now considered an NBA expansion franchise because the season after they changed their name, the Charlotte Bobcats would become the Charlotte Hornets, bringing back the Hornet name and branding to the city where it originally began. So now the original Charlotte Hornets, before they moved to New Orleans, their history now belongs back to the Charlotte franchise, and everything 2002 and on belongs to the Pelicans franchise. Can be a little confusing, but I think that's the way it should go. The Charlotte Bobcats era is also considered a part of Charlotte Hornets history, and the last active player to have ever played for the Bobcats is actually Garrett Temple, who had a very brief stint in Charlotte in 2011. The Bobcats were always kind of the laughingstock of 2000s and early 2010s NBA culture. I can remember vividly how they were always kind of the standard of bad professional sports teams and consistently in the lottery every single year. Garrett Temple has had a very long NBA career, going undrafted in 2009 and finding himself on an NBA roster still in 2025. He's been a solid role player for most of his career, but he's been nothing short of an NBA journeyman. Out of the 11 NBA teams he's played for, one of his shortest stays was in Charlotte, where he played only 12 games as a Bobcat, averaging 3 points per game. Fast forward 13 years later, and Garrett Temple is now 39 years old and a member of the Toronto Raptors. The last remaining Charlotte Bobcat wasn't Kemba Walker, it wasn't Cody Zeller, wasn't Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, but Garrett Temple. I'm not sure anyone expected Garrett Temple to be part of such a niche piece of NBA history, but when you play for so long and you play for so many teams, you're kind of bound to make some kind of history in some way. And just as a quick footnote, former Charlotte Bobcat Bismack Biyombo was actually just re-signed by San Antonio late in the 2025 offseason, so it's also a very real possibility that he is the last remaining Bobcat in league history. It's kind of fitting that one of the worst eras in a franchise's history's last remaining players are two players you probably never guess. One of Temple's career stops included the Memphis Grizzlies, who, as most of you probably know, began their franchise history north of the border in Canada as the Vancouver Grizzlies. While the Grizzlies haven't been in Vancouver since 2001, one of their players did have a career that lasted into the 2010s. The last player I want to talk about in this video and the final Vancouver Grizzly to ever play in the NBA is Mike Bibby. Mike Bibby has been retired for over a decade now, but you still see people wearing his Vancouver Grizzlies jerseys everywhere, as they were some of the toughest unis in the league to this day. But Bibby was a really solid point guard for his entire 14-year career, averaging 14 points and 5 assists throughout that time. He was drafted second overall by the Grizzlies in the '98 draft, which was actually held in Vancouver that year for the first and only time. Due to the lockout-shortened season, they wouldn't play a full 82-game year, and the Grizzlies would reach rock bottom as a franchise, winning only 8 games during the 1998-99 season. Bibby would spend the next 2 and final seasons in Vancouver on teams that were at the bottom of the league, and the team would move to Memphis following the 2001 season. However, Bibby would not be relocating to Tennessee with them. He was traded to Sacramento that same summer and became the floor general to one of the better teams of the early 2000s, helping them reach the Western Conference Finals in 2002. He spent his best years with the Kings and spent his later years in Atlanta, Miami, and finished his career in 2012 with the Knicks in another lockout-shortened season, ironically. Bibby is maybe the only player ever to start and end his career during seasons cut short by a lockout, and also be the last player to play for a certain iteration of a franchise, which is pretty crazy in my opinion. Teams moving, changing names, and having this big shift in franchise history doesn't happen relatively often, but somebody has to be the last player to have ever played for them. With all the moves in NBA history, there are way more players who fit this niche, but I thought it'd be cool to go through a few recent players that are either still playing or have retired within the last few years or so. But I had a good time looking into this, and I hope y'all enjoyed this one. My name is Caleb. If you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe. I appreciate y'all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.